Hey guys, Mr. Tweet here. So the last few videos that you guys watched were about the power of the presidency. And the general trend that we've seen is an increasing power to that president over time. Um, there's certain things that are kind of specific, powers that are supposed to be kind of held for Congress, and then certain powers that are held for the president. But in the general, the president is supposed to be like the top policeman of the country. His job isn't to write the rules. His job is to enforce them. But we've seen that change over time. And probably one of the biggest examples of this is the power to declare war. Now, in the Constitution, it's super clear that it's Congress that has the power to declare war. So whether we're trying to figure out whether our country should go to war or not, that should be Congress's call, not the president. The president is the commander in chief. He orders the troops. He's responsible for the military doing their thing. But when it comes to that decision of whether we go to war or not, that's supposed to be Congress. Um, but then, a crazy thing happened. After World War II, the United States stopped declaring war. Didn't mean we stopped fighting wars. Fought a war in Korea, like 6 years after World War II ended, like barely, any time at all passed after World War II, and the United States is fighting a war in Korea. Um, Although technically it was the United Nations that was doing a police action in Korea, and so that's how the president was able to get around that declaration of war. Was that it was because it was part of this United Nations thing. Same thing happened in Vietnam. That the United States never declared war in Vietnam. Technically, the Vietnam War was another police action where essentially the United States was providing all of the troops, but on paper somewhere it wasn't the United States fighting this war. Um, it was the United Nations. Um, Congress got pretty pissed because this whole war in Vietnam began without their approval, and it slowly escalated until it got to the point where Congress didn't want the United States to be in this war really, but also felt like they couldn't stop the funding to the war because then they would be viewed as traitors who didn't support the soldiers. So, essentially their job to decide when we go to war or not was totally taken from them in Vietnam. So they passed something called the War Powers Resolution, which was an attempt to try to take some of that power back. But what it really did was it really put in law that the president decides if we go to war or not. And so now, based on that War Powers Act, War Powers Resolution, now basically the president can send soldiers into a conflict for up to 60 days before he has to go to Congress and ask for some kind of authorization. And so what happens now is that the president sends soldiers in to start fighting a war, and then after the fact, the president then asks Congress if it's okay. Now, there's never been in a war that wasn't popular with the American people, at least at the beginning. And so it puts Congress like really in a bad spot. Like if they're to say, no, you can't fight this war, that, they're going to be accused of not supporting American soldiers, leaving American soldiers out there to die. It's just a really bad place to be for a congressperson. So we've seen this since then with Reagan in Grenada, with Clinton in Bosnia. Uh, we saw it with George W. Bush, with George H.W. Bush in Iraq, his son, George W. Bush, in Afghanistan and Iraq. All of these conflicts, the president sent soldiers in, started a war, and then went to Congress and said, hey, can I get authorization? And Congress comes back and says, sure, I guess you can have authorization. We'll start, doing this. And the United States has been in Afghanistan for like 18 years now. Again, no official declaration of war, that power of Congress taken away. Now the president starts conflicts, and then he goes to Congress to ask for permission after the fact, and Congress is never going to say no. So this is an example of how power has shifted from Congress to the president. There's other things as well. The increase in executive orders has really skyrocketed over time. Where presidents are basically directing the bureaucracy to either not enforce laws, or to only enforce certain parts of laws that they like. And so, in many ways, the president has become the chief legislature of our country. So, for better or for worse, we've seen a big shift in that power. Alrighty. So we've got an assignment. See you guys in a little bit. We'll talk about that. And then, yeah, peace.